Today's topic is both timely and important as generated AI content becomes an increasingly visible part of the publishing and library landscape. We are delighted to have excellent speakers today to share their perspectives and experiences, exploring how libraries and vendors are responding to the growing presence of generative AI. And before we welcome them, let's do the usual housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded. You will be able to view and to rewatch the recording after it ends. Or also you can visit our YouTube channel and check this webinar soon after, or also other previous webinars that we have conducted. Um, uh, uh, um, Except for the speakers and the host and moderator, the mics and the video are turned off for everyone. If you have a question to the presenter or to us or to the panelists, we strongly advise you to use the Q&A box in order to have all the questions visible to us, and nothing will be lost in the chat. You can use the closed captioning in whatever language you wish to use, your language, your own language. But just in case you feel that the terminology is not topic related or it's hallucinating, English should be fine and will enable you to follow the presentation and the present. So our speakers today are three marvelous ladies, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce them. Selena, Chau, Jenny, Hudson, and Alison Henry. Selena is the collection strategist librarian at UC Santa Barbara and an adjunct faculty member at Santa Barbara City College. She teaches online courses on preservation and collection care for cultural heritage professionals, and she serves on the planning committee of the Acquisition Institute at Time Berlin Lodge, focusing on trends in library acquisitions and collection development. Alison Henry is the head of collection strategies at the University of Alberta Library in Edmonton, Alberta. She is a strong advocate for library collaboration and serves on the executive committee of the Health Knowledge Network and the collection standing committee of the Council of Prairie and Pacific University Library. And Jenny Hudson, who is collection development manager and profiling team lead at GOBI Library Solutions. She's supporting academic libraries across the Western United States and Canada. She works with libraries to develop strategic collection plans and approval workflows, and has led efforts to improve transparency around AI-generated content through new tools. Selena, Alison, and Jenny, please join me here in order to present. Now I will take off I stop sharing my screen, and the floor is over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Selena Chau. I'm glad to be here with you today, and you should see my slides here. Just want to check, speak up, and we can help if you are having any technical difficulty. We have marvelous moderators, and thank you for that great introduction. As noted, I am a collection strategist librarian at the University of California at Santa Barbara. I'm kicking off our presentation today. First, our introductions and a scope of the presentation. Then we will look at the case study, which is a book that includes content created with the aid of an AI tool. I'll introduce the challenges that we discovered for librarians and the discussions we had with colleagues. This included how AI-generated content affects library resource selection and how AI-generated content are described and presented in catalogs to our patrons. Then my co-presenter Jenny Hudson will describe how a vendor tool is developed and its impact as a model. My other co-presenter, Alison Henry, will further explain from her perspective the library responses to AI-generated works and discuss what comes next. I work at the University of California, Santa Barbara. We have 25,000 enrollments and over 5.6 million library holdings. We are one of 10 University of California campuses, and we can coordinate our acquisition of library materials through the California Digital Library. This is a separate body which negotiates purchases for our campus as well as other campuses in our consortium. In my department, we are responsible for the loanable collections in all subjects and formats, and we are comprised of one director, 6 librarians, and 1 data analyst. At the University of Alberta, there are 46,500 students. They have over 10 million print and electronic holdings. They are a top 5 research university in Canada, and their libraries are open to the public as well as faculty and students. Their collection strategies department is responsible for centralized collections decision making and is comprised by 1 head, 4 librarians, and 5 support staff. Our third co-presenter is Jenny Hudson, who works at the company GOBI, so I will introduce how our academic libraries use GOBI. They provide both a book marketplace and a set of services for our libraries. For example, with GOBI, we receive books automatically according to a profile that we have defined for book acquisitions. Additionally, our librarians can purchase books title by title. We chose to use a GOBI service to receive full OCLC catalog records, and we chose to use a service where GOBI puts the spine labels on our print books before sending them to our library. The important takeaway here is that our librarians review the metadata provided in the GOBI marketplace to make book selections, and this is very valuable to us. I'll start with a definition because artificial intelligence is all around us and may mean different things in different workplaces and even in different departments within the same library. Our grounding definition of artificial intelligence is from UNESCO. They say that artificial intelligence are machine technologies and tools built from data, hardware, and connectivity that mimic human intelligence, such as perception, problem solving, linguistic interaction, or creativity. The scope of this presentation is AI summarization in monographs. Our case study is an academic resource. It is specifically individually sold content derived with the use of an AI tool. The way I found out about this resource was through librarian listservs, communication with colleagues through different working groups. After I received an email about this resource, I looked up the title in question in our library catalog, and I saw that this title was an active ebook in our collection. However, none of our librarians selected it for acquisitions, and I wondered how this happened. It turns out that these machine-generated summaries are included in a system-wide ebook package purchase. This is a normal way that our library receives new books. It's just that we did not expect a new kind of content to be included in our ebook package. This is an example of what we saw in the library, in the GOBI platform, a platform we use to select books. This is a common view of a book record with the exception of the part boxed in red. It says AI generated summaries of published articles. This was unusual when going through the process of looking for and selecting books for our collection, so I flagged it for discussion. This next slide shows a screenshot of the example title. And I do want to note that we have references that we'll share at the end so you can explore and understand this more in detail. What I wanted to point out here is the text in double quotes under abstract summary and the advice at the top that says if you want to cite the papers, please refer to the original. Then this is a note within an ebook text that a patron is accessing. This is another view of the resource description. This comes from our library catalog record in this summary field. This information comes from the publisher. It explains that the tool is used and how the tool is used with a human in the loop. It also says that these auto summaries are not representative of its original paper and that machine-generated books are still at an experimental stage. These past slides demonstrate the unusual notes that we saw that we flagged for discussion. Usually, when I do my book selection, I am not looking for experimental books, but rather high quality books that will be useful for patrons at our institution for research, teaching, and learning. This was a concern, especially because they appeared in our catalog without notice. In this case, we wanted to understand how we could learn about the case study book, the resource that was created with the use of AI. The other concern was that less than 11% of chapter content was written by a human. How I came up with this number was with a word count. I did a word count of the text that was not surrounded by double quotes, and this was the creative original work written by the editor. And then I did a word count of all the words that were within double quotes, which was greatly the majority of the resource. I just checked 2 titles and did an average and came up with this ratio. So it's not a firm definition, but it gives an idea of how much of the book is summarized with the AI tool and how much is human content. Another concern was the note that said that summarized content was not intended to be cited and that the original work should be cited. But everywhere in a catalog, we intend for our patrons to use the resources that we provide. And we introduce this concept to students in instruction and teaching. Information literacy is a very important service we provide in a library. So this was a concern because we found a resource that did not follow the expected use of resources. Finally, I wondered how many books there are like this because we essentially bought the content twice. We already had access to the articles from the publisher through another purchase, and this new purchase came through an ebook package. So we were concerned about the responsible use of collection funds. When I organized a discussion with my department, I centered questions around 3 different kinds of relationships with patrons, with vendor representatives, and with ourselves, our colleagues doing the work for patrons. So, with patrons, we are most concerned with what additional mediation might be needed to help patrons assess and use this resource. Um, in a discussion with librarians across the University of California system, I had heard that a few patrons were asking their librarians how they can filter out works generated by and created by use of AI tools. And we think this comes from directives in their classes or different faculty are having requirements of how students use resources for their assignments and their work. In terms of vendor relations, our question was how can librarians advocate for options when it comes to AI content? We work closely with vendor representatives, sales reps who are familiar with the content of their company, who present it to us for assessment. If we were to know about this content, would we be able to opt out of purchasing these kinds of titles when we are looking to select information for our collections? And it turns out for this case, our sales rep was also unknowing about this new kind of content. So this points to our need for everybody to be aware of this new kind of resource that is out there in the publishing and library landscape. Finally, around collection guidelines, I was wondering what kind of guidance and training I would need if I was to be responsible still for selection and assessment of materials. These resources are perhaps increasing in volume. How will we deal with them? What tools are out there for me to assess their quality? Um, Secondly, should we update our collection development guidelines to make a public statement about how we are reviewing and selecting these kinds of works? When we talk about our local needs, we then try to figure out what is needed and how we communicate that to our vendor representatives. For example, these two questions were important to take a step back and figure out how we would work in a world where AI is present and there is increasing adoption of AI tools in the publishing industry and in libraries as well. So questions like, where would AI be welcome for a work to still be trusted? Would we want AI translated books in our collection? Is that a different kind of use of AI tool? And how would we learn about this and how do we ask our publisher for this information? So we had these conversations locally, and they led to responses that were tailored to our individual library needs. We wanted to share these questions with you, introduce them to you, because these discussions perhaps will lead to different responses that are tailored to your institution needs. We wanted to reiterate that everyone may come to different conclusions from this emerging topic that is still developing. For example, it may make sense for someone to update their collection development policy around AI, but at our library, we wanted to take a step back and understand how the entire library would approach the use of AI to ensure that any statements would be cohesive with how each unit in the library is adapting to this AI technology. Where do these conversations go now that our department is aware? We are still sharing the information in conversations with our colleagues and with our vendor representatives. This explains that last year in May, I had a conference where I talked to my GOBI representative, Jenny Hudson, and asked her what she was seeing from her side in the publishing and vendor side of things. So with that, I will hand it over to Jenny to continue the story of our case study.
Easily. All right. I'm going to be telling Selena to do next slide so she can be the driver. GOBI is a company that is based around the world, but some of you may not know of us. We are actually owned by EBSCO, but we operate as an independent, and we are not actually limited to EBSCO content. In fact, we worked with thousands of publishers and e-content providers across all of the academic marketplace. And this is the role that we really provide to the libraries that, like Selena had said, that we're here to help libraries discover, select, acquire, and manage this content. As we noted, we're primarily focused on academic monographs, and each year we bring in about 70,000 titles where we profile them through our system. I wanted to talk a little bit about that profiling process because it really feeds into what the libraries are seeing and using. Every single title, every single one of those 70,000 titles has a human profiler. So we don't rely on AI and we don't rely on publisher supplied metadata. This is a book in hand process. They're interacting with the physical or in some cases, electronic version of the book. And then they look at that, they create a record based on that using both all of the publisher's descriptions, the interaction with that book, as well as any other content that they may be able to find about the book. So this ends up creating a record that you saw, the one that Selena shared. Then that record will include bibliographic information. It also includes things like subject classification, audience level, and then all of these interdisciplinary or tags that we feel are important for the library to know about or see. In the example that Selena shared, you noted that there was a little note that said it was an AI generated content. We also have a place for a free text note when we have no tag or metadata that has been previously decided on. to be attached to the title. So all of this enhanced metadata helps these libraries better understand the relevance for their collection. Another part of that Selena has referenced is that libraries can actually create a GOBI profile, and that is a set of unique institutional needs that we program into our system, and then it can match to the library's needs to send either notification of new titles, automatically send titles. As Selena said, you can get automatic books, or it also can be used to exclude titles altogether. So remove stuff you're not interested. As you can imagine, 70,000 titles is a lot of titles. So this process allows our system to focus and hone in on the titles of interest for the library. Those profiles can be customized. They're based on subject area, academic level, publisher preferences, language, geographic focus, all sorts of parameters. And in this case, they can also be focused on specific tags that we add to a certain title based on what we see about the title. So all of this happens and is built by the GOBI profiler describing and categorizing a newly published content, and then the libraries defining the type of material they want, and then there's a matching process that happens. And this enables libraries to receive only the information and the titles they want and exclude anything that's unwanted. So at its core, GOBI provides a library-focused platform for discovering, evaluating, and acquiring academic content. But this puts us in a place where we're in the middle of this rapid growth of AI-generated content. So as Selena said, libraries were seeing this content, and we stand between the library and the publisher, and they were asking us to help find it, identify it, and make sure everyone knows that it's out there. So next slide. Okay. And this is what actually ended up bringing me here today. It was that GOBI record that Selena spoke about that ended up out in the world and everybody started discussing. There were cases where publishers were disclosing AI use, either in a book's descriptions or, as Selena noted, there was some blurb or discussion, but it wasn't overly obvious to the library. In the example for our case study, for GOBI, there was no dedicated place for the GOBI record to capture this information. So we were relying on this free text field, a notes area where we could basically put something that we thought was important, but we had no tag specific to it. However, there was no way for you to search for that or for us to use that to feed profiles or so that libraries could exclude or filter out the AI-generated content. So with this example, librarians noticed it. It went on listservs, it was talked about, and everybody ended up talking about it and contacting me and my coworkers because it was our record. And so they were asking GOBI to discuss this further. I've worked with Selena for a long time, and I work at GOBI in a committee that is responsible for developing this content, developing the tags, developing the profiling material so that we can make sure that they meet the needs of the library. Around this time, we had actually already been discussing an AI tag, a tag about AI content. However, this brought to the fore that we were needing to answer not just, is this an AI title about AI, but is this a title where AI was particularly involved in the creation of the material? Libraries were asking, how do we identify this? What are your plans moving forward? So we had to think fast and discuss quickly. Selena mentioned that last May there was a conference, and as it turned out, I was at that conference, and we ended up sitting down, having a conversation, and what I thought was going to be a few people turned into a nice big circle and a very deep discussion. I brought this back to my team and I said, it's not that we need to just address this, we need to address this quickly. So at GOBI, these tags that we use usually develop over a period of about 6 months to a year. We do this so that we can define the tag appropriately, test the consistency, and train our profilers. However, because of the urgency we were hearing from libraries, we decided to accelerate this, and we were able to roll this out in just a couple of months. So, as I said, we were originally going to just have an AI title, and then we decided to have an AI generated title. And that intended use of that tag was going to be for both translated and AI written content. We were going to glom it all together. However, what we learned very quickly as we rolled out this new tag was that libraries didn't necessarily like that. So we decided to continue this conversation and realized after talking to libraries that we really needed not just an AI generated or AI written content tag, we also needed an AI translated tag. What we were hearing was that AI translations actually for some libraries were very important. They increased access to the material, they could enable access across language barriers, and they made some very important research available very quickly without having to rely on some translator using that. So there were libraries who very much wanted to use them. So as a result, within a few more months, we created the AI translated tag. What you see today on this screen is the 3 definition set that we have in place right now. They are the current approach that we take to these AI tags. So while those humans are looking at each and every book, they are looking for, is it about AI? Is it AI generated as far as we can tell? Or is it AI translated? As you can probably tell from the story, this has been pretty rapidly evolving. We have made a lot of changes. As I said, we usually take a long time to sort of test and work and discuss a tag, but we felt it was so important that we get this out there that we needed to go ahead and implement it. And then we were kind of working as it was growing and developing. So as far as this definitions go, the key takeaway is that the AI generated and AI translated tags were driven directly by the library feedback and the need to get this in place quickly. So this has been a very collective effort between GOBI and the library community. So next slide. All right. So this is a GOBI record now. As you can see, these titles have a clear AI generated tag applied in that little red square. We now have a place, those are searchable. They are also now very visible, so you can see if you are looking for that content. Next slide. We have also now made it possible for users to search specifically for these titles. Not only do you see that on the GOBI record, but you now have the ability to search and find that content in GOBI. So as Selena mentioned, and Alison's going to talk more in detail about being able to identify this information is very important. Whether it means that you are flagging these titles in your catalog or you're just trying to review the content that is being released that's generated, or really just make a decision about whether or not to purchase a title. This is informative. So being able to search and find this information is important. Okay, next slide. We also talked about the profiles and the profiling process. This is an Excel document clip that we use as our sort of grid and our template when we build specifications for each library. Here you can see that we've added all of these terms that I've discussed to our template so that libraries can make a decision on how they want to move forward with each of these. Okay, next slide. All right, so what has this been? What has the impact been? After rolling this out, we have had the AI generated tag in place for about a year, and the AI translated has been around for about 3 months less than that, so 3/4 of a year. Since then, we have seen many libraries really interested and very much in favor of this. So it's been very positive. When we first rolled this out, we were asking everyone to decide how they felt about AI generated content. And it quickly became clear that for the most part, everyone wanted it excluded. So we decided to auto exclude anything that is AI generated. This means no one would get an automatic ship book and no one would get a notification of a new title unless they actively talk to us about overriding that exclusion. So we have found 3 libraries have opted to receive these titles for SLIP, and 4 libraries have opted to maintain some neutral category for these, which means that they would be okay getting a book or a notification about that title. This is out of thousands and thousands of profiles, so it's pretty significant how low these opt-ins have been. Now, the response to AI translated has been very different. Some libraries have opted to exclude it, but for most, they have kept it neutral, and this enables them to look and evaluate those titles before purchasing. As far as volume, we're talking a lot about this, but since implementing these tags, we've had 60 AI generated titles and about 130 AI translated titles. So it's some, but it's not a huge amount, but they are definitely worth knowing that they are in there. And they do provide a good set of titles that we can start really understanding what are the trends, what what publishers are producing this kind of content, and then where is AI generated material falling within subject areas or within collections. So beyond that, there has been another set of discussions, and that is about cataloging and not just having this properly identified in GOBI, but how is it being identified in the cataloging record? When we create cataloging records, are able to pass this on in these tags on in our metadata and our records. However, at this point, there has not been a larger standardization conversation. And I think that is something we still need to see happening. Beyond that, publishers, we've had multiple conversations with publishers because our information is only as good as the information we're receiving about the title from publishers. So of course, that opens up a whole even bigger conversation about at what point does a work become AI generated? Is there a significant place where we can say it has been written by AI versus the author just used it as an editing tool, a translator, or a brainstorming assistant? Those distinctions aren't always clear. And then ultimately, there is a much more of an effort, and I think there is much bigger part of this conversation that has yet to be considered. And we are going to see this continue to grow and develop. And I suspect that means that the GOBI service will grow and develop with it. And so with that, I'm going to pass that on to Alison. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Yes, I'm going to talk about My library's specific response to this situation, like Selena, I found out about these works through a listserv, probably an email from Selena to a listserv, actually. Um, and in our case, the works in question were part of a larger ebook front list purchase that we make through a consortium. So this was not an individual, these were not individual title selections made within our library, and the purchase itself was not made directly from the publisher, but via a consortium. So our first response was, of course, to reach out to, oh, actually, I should give you the overview here. Um, I'll talk about reaching out through the consortium to address this, an update that we have made to our collection development policy, and some additional actions that we have taken. Oh, I'm seeing a note that the sound is not working properly. Are you able to hear me? I'm seeing some nods from my co-presenters at least.
Yes, so I hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. So perhaps people can adjust their own volumes if there are differences in the way the sound is coming through from the different speakers. Um, yes, so I'll talk about the response through our consortium, and then some actions we have taken in our individual library around changes to the collection development policy and suppression of catalog records. Next slide, please, Jenny. Uh, when we found out about these titles, after a quick internal discussion with the librarians on my team, we reached out to the other members of the consortium through which we buy these books to see if other people were aware and to see whether or not they shared our concerns around the inclusion of these titles. Um, Through these discussions, we identified as a group three main concerns that we wanted to bring to the publisher around these. The first is the lack of transparency, that these titles are difficult to identify in title lists and in KBART files. There's no consistent labeling to distinguish them from other titles that maybe follow a more traditional human-driven publishing process or creation process. And this lack of clarity makes it harder for libraries to assess what is being included in their collections. We also have some quality and integrity concerns. Quite frankly, we question the scholarly value of this work. In this particular example, the AI summary is specifically one that takes complete sentences from the source works and creates a new chapter from these sentences. So other than the introduction by the book's author or editor, these sentences all come from other published works, other authors' published works, and now this new person is getting credit for this work. This didn't sit very well with us. We questioned the value that a literature overview that is really only summarizing one publisher's um, publications on a topic really add to the scholarship in a given area, and felt that these were not titles that we would otherwise choose to include in our collection, especially given that with this publisher, we had a large journal package from them. And so theoretically, we already own all of this content there for our users to discover. Um, Additionally, the publisher's own labeling of these as experimental works raised some questions about their reliability and accuracy. And then finally, the lack of choice or the lack of ability to opt out of including these did not sit well with us. Generally speaking, we rely on these large front list packages because in our case, we're quite a large institution. We teach and research across many, many, many different subject areas. It's quite reasonable that we would want the bulk of what a particular publisher is putting out in a given year. And we do not have the staff to be doing title by title selection for the number of works we would like to acquire in a given year. So these kinds of purchases normally work well for us when the publisher is a provider of trusted content. And we felt that this lack of choice really diminished the trust that we had around this content. So our consortial representatives went to the publisher with these concerns, and the response was that the program is limited in scope. This is a small percentage of the ebook output. That they've been doing this for a few years and adjusting, and originally it was a fully AI process. They've added the human subject editors based on feedback they received in the earlier, I guess, editions, earlier attempts at creating books in this way. They quite vigorously defended the inclusion of these titles as filling a gap in scholarly publishing, and they felt that having that subject matter expert direction was sufficient to ensure appropriate quality, and were completely opposed to removing them from front lists or segmenting the titles in any way. They did acknowledge the burden that the inconsistent metadata creates and the lack of clear labeling, and have committed to addressing this, though we don't have a particular time commitment or specific understanding of exactly what they mean by providing clearer labeling in the future. So the consortial's approach is to consider this at this point, recommend that our member libraries take the actions that they deem appropriate for their institutions, and that this is an item that we will keep as a consideration in future negotiations with this and other publishers, and hope that it can be resolved at that time. So next slide, please. Given that, we decided to take a few actions on our own. I will say that this is not the only case of either suspected or confirmed AI-generated works making their way to our library. I will briefly mention there were a couple of print works that our library purchased based on a request from an instructor at our school. And when they had different titles, different authors, they were about the same subject matter. And when they arrived, our processors, in taking a look at the physical works, could easily tell that inside the covers, the content was identical. And so this is not a scholarly publisher attempting to maybe monetize their content in a different way, repackage scholarly content in a different way. This is really, I consider these to be scammers taking advantage of people who don't necessarily know or who don't have the tools to evaluate these works as thoroughly, perhaps, as librarians and researchers do. And so this also raised questions for us, though, about what kind of information is available to us in making purchasing decisions, and also allowed us to be a bit more clear on what we are hoping to acquire. Our collection development policy, I've included a piece of it here on this slide and bolded the minor change that we made in the wake of these situations. We have always sought to acquire high quality materials for our students and faculty. We have added human authored to this description of what we seek to acquire, because we do feel that that is the goal of the library. We are an institution of higher education and higher learning, and that is meant to reflect human learning, I guess, more so than machine. Next slide, please. So in this case, we felt that, our users are now entitled to these works. We have purchased them. If you go to the vendor platform, you can access them by virtue of being affiliated with our institution. And that is not something that we can change. The publisher was unwilling to make any changes in that regard. But we do not have to point our users directly to these items along with other items in our catalog. So we decided that we would suppress the records for these titles in our catalog. Unfortunately, as has been repeatedly mentioned, there isn't standardized metadata around this. We don't have a particular MARC field where this information is stored so that we can easily do this suppression. And so instead, the collection strategies librarians compiled a list to the best of our ability. I think initially we identified 50 some titles that we wanted to exclude, and then we shared that with our cataloging department to actually execute the change. I see this as overly labor intensive for this kind of work, and I really hope that some additional systems can be developed to more clearly flag these works. So that we could do something like this in a more automated fashion in the future. We've also made some changes to our acquisitions procedures. We also have approval plans via GOBI, so we are among the libraries who automatically exclude this material from our approval plans. So we will not be automatically purchasing any of it in that case. And also, we are pulling back from buying from vendors with a higher likelihood of machine generated works available to avoid situations like that, those print works that came in that were exact duplicates of each other than their titles and supposed authors and covers. Next slide, please. So the conversation that we are still hearing or that we are still having is very much around what comes next. Where do we go from here? I expect we will have many more discussions with our consortial partners, with publishers, with library vendors to make clear our concerns and our preferences and hope that we can have some influence on these decisions. We're also trying to be aware of different kinds of AI transparency efforts. I know that we've seen statements from a few different publishers at this point on around their expectations around the disclosure of the use of AI in article creation or monograph creation. I know that different organizations are trying to come up with a taxonomy to identify this, and so we're trying to remain aware of efforts like these so that we will be in a position to make use of them to support our users' access to high quality information going forward. And that is all for our presentation. If Selena, you want to share the slide with our contact information, but now I will turn it over to our moderators to guide the question and answer period.
Thank you, our dear presenters, for this very informing presentation that is really addressing the subject of uh, uh, bibliographic transparency and collection integrity. We learned from you today because as we represent other type of libraries or institutions that are mandated with collecting at the national level and operating national bibliographies, we wanted to understand the issues surrounding those newcomers in the publishing ecosystem because they are here. Maybe we could have some freedom here, but we have just learned from your presentation that you learned this to develop this collection strategy the hard way through having those items imposed to you and passing maybe unnoticed. Nobody really alerted you about they are already here and what they constitute. And yeah, thank you so much. And now I welcome my colleague in the IFLA bibliography section, Eva Fabian, who is working at the National Library of Poland. And she holds a PhD in legal studies, and she's going to moderate that question and answer part. But first, we would have to announce that we have a short questionnaire for you because it's building on a questionnaire a survey that we have launched in a previous webinar, trying to understand the issues surrounding generative AI, AI generated content. So please mind taking, can we share this in the chat? Okay, so here is the link. So you don't have to go now, but after the webinar at any time. This is only 7 questions. We want to explore your perspective about some issues here. Eva, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this great presentation, and thank you to the attendees for very interesting questions. We have a lot of questions from an anonymous attendee, 3 or maybe 6, however we count them. First is, do you run into problems? I think this question was addressed to Jenny, but I think that everyone can answer. Do you run into problems of AI-generated works not having an AI disclosure? When you tag AI-generated works, is that from someone reading the work and identifying it is an AI? It's a very interesting question.
And on our part, yes. I think, as I sort of alluded to, that we were really relying on the information that we have about the book. So there are times when we don't know, and we've really been working with the publishers to push them to come out with a strategy for identifying this material, or really pushing their authors and editors to understand what exactly is happening within the books, because we aren't making any judgment calls. We can't decide that if it's not very clear. So it has to be pretty forthcoming for us to tag that. So likely there are materials that we don't know about and we will not be tagging. But a lot of them, as I think Selena and Alison mentioned, are very open about the fact that they are AI generated or AI has been part of the process of creating it.
Can we stop sharing the screen now? And we can share it at the end of the webinar, just in case there are others who need to note the emails to contact you. Okay.
Yeah. As a follow-up, just out of curiosity, why 75%? If you indulge me, I was wondering during the presentation, why is that the threshold?
I think that was just where we really decided. That's what we were hearing from libraries. That's where we decided was that percentage. But like I said, I feel like this is changing a lot, and that was where we landed for that day. But I think as this develops, this may change. But I think that is just a really big tipping point.
Yeah, super interesting. The second question, the same person. Have AI translated titles have have been well received. Have there been any complaints about the quality of translations?
Suspect part of that's for me as well, but I think both Selena
Yeah, the
and
library
Alison
is also
could weigh in on how that's been. I think for the most part, I haven't heard a lot of distinct dismissal of them, but I also think that they're not actually selling a huge amount. I think mostly people have opted to look at them, review them, and then opt not to, in the end, purchase them because it is iffy. But beyond that, I have been surprised at people's openness to accept and review this content. And I don't know if the libraries want to commit to what's been happening on their end.
I wouldn't mind commenting on this, even though I do not have any concrete data around this to share with attendees. This is not something that in our collections unit at least has really made it back to us from our campus community, but certainly with the discussions within the library, translation is a very kind of an interesting sticky point because people seem to see it as useful depending very much on the type of work you're talking about. There's an understanding that there can be a lot of nuance that might be lost, particularly in certain genres of work, and they would be more leery of AI translation in those genres than they would be in other types of works. So I'm curious to see as this becomes more common, whether those are more theoretical expectations around how well they would be received. I am curious to see whether that plays out in reality. And to be honest, I don't know that I could tell you whether we have or how many works we have that might fit this category. Certainly, we buy works in translation. The vast majority of the time, we expect that those are human translations, but I'm not sure. No deep dive has been done on our collection, at least around this.
So although there are not official translation conducted by humans, you have noticed that users are more tolerant to AI translated work than they are to originally AI authored work. Much more. Yeah, just to like to have an idea, or if there isn't a physical translation of this book, they would go for an AI translation.
Or at least be willing to give it a try. I think there's a sense that it's filling a gap in a way that AI authorship is not.
I will say that Alison and Selena and I presented at the recent Charleston Asia conference in Bangkok. And I spoke to a number of libraries who had conversations about this, but I spoke to one librarian out of Hong Kong, and she said she definitely feels like from her library, the translated AI content is important. And as long as it's identified as such, it really has enabled them to have access to a lot of information that they didn't have access to before very quickly. So I was interested to hear that.
Even if the terminology sometimes is hallucinating and not topic related, or this is okay. And let's see what we have as question from the audience.
Yes. Before we move on to this, I'm seeing some raised hands. So once again, please put your questions in the Q&A area or in the chat if you cannot find it, because we cannot invite you as a speaker on this platform. It works differently to the classic Zoom. So the third question is again about demand. I'm curious about usage stats. Are AI generated or AI translated titles being used widely? Is there patron demand? I've seen demand for AI literacy skills, but so far not much appetite for AI generated content. A similar question to the previous one.
I will share some thoughts. This is very useful because we want to understand what the patrons need and more importantly why, right? So I am cognizant that every time we give this presentation and talk about the example title, we're actually driving usage and to this particular title. So when you look at a usage stat, is that a librarian questioning this title or is it somebody using it? We just see the usage number, right? And perhaps it's important to recognize that we all are librarians, even Jenny as well. We work from a certain scope, and unfortunately, we're limited with how much we hear from patrons. Sometimes they don't bring our concerns directly to us. We just get them as long as we expand the conversation and ask the right questions. For example, I did give the example of somebody not interested because it's a directive from their purpose. Their purpose in college is to perhaps complete an assignment, and then their faculty, their teacher instructs them to use particular kinds of works and, use their own human judgment to complete an assignment. So in a short answer, I haven't pulled usage stats. I'm not really sure if they would reflect what the actual question is trying to get towards, but I'm very happy to explore this. This is, I encourage you too to see if there's other people who have considered this in their assessment of their collections.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that since there is a tag, that it can become easier to analyze, but I'm not a data scientist. You have a data analyst. That's an interesting point. Well, the next question is, are there any issues with less known publishers using AI for audiobook narration? Another category. We didn't really consider that.
I read this question in advance as it came up. I have less experience with this as a person individually. I listen to audiobooks and I have appreciated that the people who put out audiobooks still follow the same model where they try to ask the author to read their own work, and I really appreciate that. Perhaps if I was to be asked that question, I would say like, please continue that tradition. Sometimes I hear narration and then I look up if it's human or AI. I think that this field for audiobook narration, perhaps they're more aware of the need and demand from listeners to get the information they want to know. So perhaps it's more disclosed in audiobooks, but I don't know because we don't collect audiobooks, particularly in our library.
It's a very important accessibility feature, I think. So perhaps for another topic. So the last questions that we have here is, well, thank you from Anastasia Kerameos. Thank you for your presentations. To Alison, you mentioned using tools to evaluate AI content in published works. Could you share which tools you have used and would recommend?
I think this might be either a miscommunication on my part or a misunderstanding, that it's more that I believe I mentioned that our purchasing team doesn't have a tool to evaluate this or necessarily recognize easily when works are AI generated before making those purchase decisions. We do not have a specific tool to evaluate AI content in published works, and so I don't have a tool that I can recommend that would help people do that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think this refers to the example you gave that there's the book under different names.
Oh yes,
with the same
the
content.
identical content.
Yeah, so that was the cataloger who noticed that, I suppose.
Yes, that was a cataloger or a member of the processing team who noticed that. And I guess I didn't really finish that story. In our case, we returned those books to the seller, and we also reached out to the person who had made the requests to ask that they be a little more considered or do a little more vetting on their end in placing those requests in the first place. Because for the most part, um, we we don't really do a lot of vetting or questioning. If a faculty member says they want a book for a course or for their research interests, if we're able to buy it, we buy it. We don't really consider it if it generally fits within the realm of what we would collect, but in our case, that's pretty broad. So we don't normally question those. It's possible we might need to apply more scrutiny to our handling of these requests, but I hope not. I hope we can encourage requesters to be more considered before they place them in the first place.
Yeah.
I
So
appreciate
everyone
the
who is
question.
listening, there is a reaction from Anastasia. Perhaps my wishful thinking that there is such a tool. We've had an author who uses our library warn us that their book, content of a book, had appeared published under a different name, title and name. I wish I could spot these books before purchase. Yeah, so there's a startup idea, I think.
Yes, this is a different but related challenge to what we're talking about today. And I just wanted to add more information. Thank you, Anastasia, for your question, because this is where my mind went originally when I saw this title come through. As an individual, a human, I wanted to do good and ensure the quality of the titles in our collection. I thought the same thing. How can I evaluate this content? And anything short, I couldn't think of anything else except it would require human time to go through the book. And as we may know, this takes a lot more time than, using an AI tool, probably just like clicking a few times and you generate a book. Like there's no way that librarians can keep up with the possible creation of these kind of works. So sadly, I kind of hit a dead end, but I am open to whatever brainstorming people have around this concern, besides like, pointing to it, indexing certain metadata terms so we can filter and search and really hone in on specific titles. What next, right? So it does require some human effort. Like Alison mentioned, we also don't evaluate every single title that comes in by looking through it. So it comes down to time and AI is a tool that is encouraging other people to use to save them time, but then it creates a lot more work and creates a mountain of work for librarians who are trying to deal with the new challenges.
Yes. Last week, we had presenters who told us about their programs when they are checking, verifying, and vetting new publications before they assign ISBNs. So that can be one of the filters.
Yeah, that's a role of national bibliographic agencies also, since they are the one charged with this mission of assigning the ISBN. And last week we had this a webinar around collaboration between national bibliographic agencies and publishers, including the workflow of ISBN and CIP and this shared platforms. Okay, do we have other questions or
Yeah, these are all questions. I saw some raised hands, but
maybe I have one.
yeah.
Yeah, you have in your presentation specifically Selena and Alison as the collection strategists in university libraries. have drawn our attention to the issues surrounding those and why they are, it is very concerning to you, including the public fund, and they are unnoticed. The percentage of the low percentage of human intervention here. But let me ask a broader question, like an upstream question. What is, I have written it, so let me read it. When you look at the rapid influx of AI assisted or generated content entering our ecosystem, what do you see is the most pressing risk to the integrity of library collection, and why? For instance, I have thought about maybe it could be um, some of these or all combined: intellectual property and copyright issues, misinformation or hallucination, content citation, lack of transparency about AI use, and this you have flagged it already, quality, reliability or accuracy, ethical concerns like bias or accountability, others, or all of them. Yeah, I saw in your slide that even the characters are really like there are weird characters in the text itself, and this is something that is a real something unacceptable at all. So over to you, this question. What are the most important risks?
Thank you so much for outlining those very important concerns. I feel that there's a need for a global task force around each of those issues. These are all very important. Um, where I am concerned about how the lasting effects of libraries. If libraries as institutions continue to stand, what will we be defined as? I think there's a lot of pressure to change. A lot of, in California, there is a different system of colleges, you know, where the college itself, not the library, the college system has made a declaration that they're going to be, the leader in teaching students and encouraging and training them with AI tools because it's the world that we are moving into. And that is a great opinion, and it's not wrong. It's just, something that perhaps I have concerns about because what are we neglecting when we focus on one thing? What are we abandoning from our profession? All of our discussion questions are based on the values in our profession. So I hope that that still is grounding and doesn't change what libraries are defined as. I do want to correct one thing that the characters that you saw different, Rahab, are actually accurate. This is a science publication, so some, beta.
Okay.
But same thing. You wouldn't know because similarly, there was another publication where unless you read it, word by word, you wouldn't know if it was wrong. But when I did come across this other example, it was just really blatant that some mistake had happened. Nobody admitted why it got through the whole editing process and publishing process until a person had to read it and then submit the question to. But like it is really a difficult and long process, right?
Robotic language somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Other thoughts from Allison and Jenny? That's a really intriguing question.
Yeah, I feel like it is hard maybe to pick one concern. Um, in part of my concern lies around the fact that we are an educational institution. Um, and a lot of my concern around particularly large long language model generated content is that it does a very good job of mimicking a certain level of quality. And it takes a certain level of expertise to recognize the problems sometimes in these summaries. And we are working with students who do not have that expertise. They are supposed to be developing that expertise as part of their learning. They're supposed to be reading widely and tackling all kinds of different problems, not because we really need, yet another essay on a certain topic, but because the work they go through as part of that creation process helps deepen their understanding. And I'm very worried about people who, yes, who do not yet have the expertise to recognize problems. So I guess this is more from the misinformation aspects of this. Um, And I'm also concerned about the concept of, I guess, responsibility. I mean, when we talk about authorship, we often talk about responsibility statements and who is responsible for a particular work. And in the case of a work that has very minimal human contribution to its creation, who is ultimately responsible for that? Why are we crediting an author who has basically copied and pasted sentences out of someone else's work to build something new? If a student turned that in for an assignment, that would not be acceptable. So I don't think we should reduce our the standards of what we are requiring in the library to something that wouldn't even be acceptable as coursework in our classes. Obviously, we have varying levels of quality of the content of our materials, and things go out of date, and not every item in our library is the most accurate information available on a topic. Of course not, but it can still be our goal that every item in the library be high quality and an accurate representation of its topic. And I don't think that we should give up that goal.
Thank you so much.
We
Okay.
are near the end of time, I think, but I see this
Yeah,
new question and I'm going to put the answer in the chat, but then for the benefit of everybody else, if you know, can't navigate to the answer, feel free to contact any one of us with your questions. We really want to further the discussion. We're really interested in your feedback. How are you dealing with the challenges as well? Yes, so
I,
glad to see that there's a collection
I
librarian here.
thank you so much, Lena. And also, I'm sharing equally in the chat again the link to the quick survey. It's like only 7 questions, and we'd love to hear your perspectives around this topic. So if we can wrap up here because you have, can you, for the last time, share your slide with your email addresses so um, interested attendees who would like to connect with you or have follow-up questions, they can.
I believe IFLA has an AI SIG, special interest group, right? Is that a
Yeah, but
good?
they have like a broad agenda. It's
True.
yeah, we do sometimes program with them events. Okay, so we take this slide off, and I think it's time to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much, Selena, Jenny, and Alison, for this excellent, thought-provoking presentation, and thank you for preserving and pursuing integrity of collections of like we do for national bibliographies to keep a verified human record of publication. And thank you, Eva, for moderating the question. Thank you, attendees, all of you, for joining us today. Thank you also for sharing your perspective through this short survey. And now it's time to say goodbye. This was the third webinar in 2026 for us as IFLA bibliography section, and we'll resume in the fall with other topics. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks for all time attendees of our webinar. Now, see you around, and thank you. Goodbye.